What's going on, guys? I hope you all are doing well. So we're going to be ranking all of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films this time. I did do a ranking back a few months ago of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre films that were out at the time. But now that the new film is out, and I've seen it a couple times, and I've had some time to let it marinate in my mind, I think I'm at a point now where I can comfortably put it in my rankings list without any hesitation at all. And I do need to let everyone know as a disclaimer here that I am a purist for the Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the original, from 1974. And I think that almost all the following films are bad. Personally, that's my personal opinion. And you might have noticed as well that if you had seen my prior rankings list before the new film came out, that there's a certain film on here that has jumped up a spot or two. So, that is subject to happen sometimes. So let's go ahead and start from the worst to the best, starting in the bottom right corner. We have Texas Chainsaw 3D, and this film is in a league of its own. I will admit, when I saw this in theaters, at first I enjoyed the scene where we went back to 1973, because the original does take place in 73, not 74. And we saw the shootout at the old house, because it was nice to see the old house back. But upon rewatch as an adult, I realized that all the people in that house were nowhere to be seen in the original film. And sure, you could argue that the Sawyers rallied up the family and called them up on the phone and say, hey, come over to the house and get ready to fight off the cops. We're going to have a big shootout and whatnot. And whether that makes sense to you or not is totally subjective. But that isn't even the worst of this film's issues. This film literally cannot decide on what time period this takes place in. You have the main girl, who's played by Alexandra Daddario, who is supposed to be playing a woman in her late 30s, early 40s, but she looks like she's like 19. And this film could have passed for taking place in the 90s, and it was actually selling me on that for a little bit until there's a scene where a cop goes to the house to investigate, and instead of pulling out a flashlight, because it's nighttime, it's dark, he pulls out a Droid or an iPhone. It's a smartphone, essentially. And I just think, if you had just given the cop a flashlight instead of a smartphone, you could have had this pass for taking place in the 90s, and it could have solved this whole problem. But no, they chose not to do that. And did I mention that the sheriff from 1973 to, 2012, 2013, this movie came out? Yeah, 2013, this movie came out. Never ages from 73 to 2013, which is a little bit odd to me. The acting was mostly bad. Actually, everybody that acted in this film, if your name wasn't Alexandra Daddario, chances are your acting in this film was really shit. And the biggest culprit there is Scott Eastwood, his awful acting. Oh, his acting is just, it's unbearable in this film. And The Mask, to me, The Mask here is the worst in the franchise. This film in general is just the worst in the franchise. It's in a league of its own, like I said, and it's going to stay right where it is. Now, moving on, we have The Next Generation. Now, guys, I've only seen this film once. I think I've only seen this film once. And I will never watch it again. I rarely, and I mean rarely, ever watch anything past the original as it is. The way Leatherface is written in this film, you can tell it was intended to be a follow-up to the original, but the way it's acted and directed was just very off-putting and not how I remembered Leatherface from the original film. The acting here was so over the top that I almost thought that this was a parody of the original. Had I not known that this was a film in the actual Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise, I would have guessed that this was a parody of the original film. And if I had maybe one redeeming quality about this movie, the house looked very close to the original from what I remember. But that's really about it for this pile of garbage. Moving on to Leatherface. Yes, Leatherface. Not to be confused with Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3. We have here a dry, boring, tedious, southern fried road trip horror film. The build-up to the birth of Leatherface was so out of left field and was not who I expected it to be. The guy that ended up becoming Leatherface in the film would have been more fit to be the hitchhiker from the original film. But no, he's Leatherface, and it takes me completely out of the movie. And for the gore hounds out there, you get some good gore here. This movie has you covered if that's all you're looking for. But if you're a fan of the original film, which this film is supposed to be a prequel to, you're going to despise it. And that's where I stand with this one. It's an awful movie. Alright, now we're going to move on to a film that actually has jumped up on my list. The 2003 Remake. Now, do I despise this movie like the previous couple? No. Do I like it now? No, not at all. This is still a bad movie. The characters here are awful. The acting from Eric Balfour, who I'm not even a fan of, I don't like Eric Balfour, just drags this movie down. But Jonathan Tucker is okay, and, well, I've never really been a big fan of Jessica Biel. I never have. The movie is paced very poorly. It's not like the original where the slow parts have dread and suspense building, and we're getting to know the characters who are way more likable in the original. We're stuck with this group of insufferable dickheads for a while, and I feel trapped when I watch this movie. Also, don't find Leatherface to be effective here at all. To me, Leatherface in the remake is just turned into Jason Voorhees and Michael Myers. But this film moved up because it is shot very well. And aside from Eric Balfour, it's acted very well, especially from Arlie Ermey. I'm a fan of the way the house looks as well. I really do like the way the house looks. It just, for me, this one doesn't hit the mark for me. I don't feel scared at all when I watch this film like I do when I watch the original. Alright, here's a shocker now. Texas Chainsaw Massacre, the newest one. Was this film good in any way? No. Was it fun? Upon second rewatch, kind of. The first time I watched this film, though, it angered me to the point where it almost made me hate the original film. Because I thought, I guess at that point, to the point where it was going to make me hate the original film, I thought that it would have just eased my suffering if I just sat and said, okay, I hate the original film and I hate this new film, but I love the original film so much that I can never bring myself to do that. But I watched it again, and I watched it more as just a slasher film, a modern-day slasher film, and not a successor to the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre. And I had a little bit of fun with it, actually. That's actually not a good thing, though, because I should be judging this film as a Texas Chainsaw film. But some of the kills, while very Friday the 13th and later Halloween sequels-esque, were very entertaining, I'm not going to lie. I hated the mask also. I hated the mask at first, but the mask is actually starting to grow on me a bit here. There's a lot of shit in here that doesn't make any sense, though. Like, why was Leatherface at an orphanage? Never really explains. The town looked like garbage, too, and I understand why. They didn't actually shoot it in Texas. They shot it in Bulgaria, and it's cheap to make films there. And the characters all suck, too, and are probably the worst characters in the franchise to me. Well, I don't know. They could rival the remake's characters for worst in the franchise. But I like seeing them all die. And I just wish this film felt like a real Texas Chainsaw film. But it's more enjoyable than the ones I have before for me personally. And I think Leatherface here feels more like Rambo than he does Leatherface from the original film. Still not a good movie at all, and it's pretty bad. And the fact that it takes a page out of Halloween 2018's book makes it even more unoriginal and uninspired. Now on to Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, or Leatherface, the Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3, rather. Honestly, I don't even know why it's called Part 3. When it's not connected to Part 2, as far as I know, the timeline in this franchise, I swear to God, man, it's worse than the Halloween franchise timeline at this point. The biggest flaw with this franchise is that none of the films really, as a franchise, feel connected to each other, and I think that Texas Chainsaw Massacre 3 is the biggest contributor to this. This film is just really boring as well. It feels like a boring, poor man's version of the original film. Leatherface looks scary, and the mask looks really good, and the guy that plays Leatherface is really good as well. And the acting as well in this movie is actually quite good. You get Viggo Mortensen and Ken Faree. They're really good actors. Yeah, they're pretty damn good in this movie, I gotta say. I just find this one hard to get through since it's just very dull. This movie doesn't have any life in it. And like I said before, the timeline doesn't make sense. It doesn't make it clear if it connects to Part 2. Oh, and this film was somehow going to be banned from theaters back when it came out. The unrated cut, it was supposed to be X-rated. The unrated cut that you can find on the DVD if you have it on DVD, when you buy it on DVD, it should have the R-rated and the unrated cut. But the unrated cut was the one that was supposed to be banned. Why? I can't even tell the difference between that version and the R-rated version. It's baffling. And yeah, this movie's bad. Skip it. Now on to a controversial take here. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre Part 2. You know, I will give it credit. It somewhat feels connected to the first film by bringing back Jim Seidow, or Seidow. I think it's Seidow. And the man that plays Leatherface, for the tone that they were going for, is actually pretty good. And Bill Moseley as Chop Top was pretty funny. That's the issue here for me. It's funny, not scary. Now I get that this was the film that I think Tobe Hooper wanted to make when he made the first film. But the problem with that is that lightning hit the bottle with the original film, and to me this is too much of a departure from what I loved about the original film. It's so over the top and so embellished, it appeals to those that love dark comedies, but not to those that love the original film. I don't think this movie is awful for what it is, but this one's just not for me at all. But I mean, Dennis Hopper is quite good, and Dennis Hopper's good in anything he's in. But yeah. Moving on to and this is where we get into some real controversy. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning. I have a lot of positive things to say about this film, but let's talk about the things I don't like first. I do think that the film is too gory. It does have quite a bit of, cheap modern horror jump scares and whatnot. And the baby, who was supposed to be Leatherface when he's thrown out in the dumpster, looks like a doll and not a real baby. And I do find this movie to be a little bit too high octane for a Texas Chainsaw Massacre film, because, the original was a little bit more contained, and I get that this was more in the timeline of the remake, so I can kind of forgive it for that. But with those negatives out of the way, this film actually answers the questions I was asking during the remake. And that's actually a complaint I see about this film. Maybe you guys weren't asking those questions, but I was. They made Leatherface scary again. He feels, a bit more sadistic than I would have liked. He still has that mind of a child, and as you can see, he's being coached into killing by his family. The mask here looks incredible, though, and it's, to me, the second best in the franchise behind the original. And our characters are actually really likable here. They're not like the remake, where it just feels like it's never going to end, and it feels like that these characters are never going to die. You actually have Jordana Brewster here, who's awesome in everything she's in. She's a great actress. And Arlie Ermey is back, and I think he's even better here than he is in the remake. And you get a dinner scene. While lacking Grandpa, I can put that aside because this is a different storyline, and it's very sick and twisted even without Grandpa. But you also understand that the family is just, this whole cannibalism thing is just a last resort, because, the slaughterhouse shut down, they're out of jobs, and everyone else has left town. It's actually kind of sad. Not saying I condone what the family does, because they're all the devil and they're all evil people. But the film does a good job of putting things into context and making it to where, we understand why what's happening is happening. The Texas Chainsaw Massacre: The Beginning is actually kind of good. I actually can recommend this movie to people. Now, this should be no surprise, the original. This is a beautifully shot and directed horror film. This is, to me, what horror should be. Not so much on the senseless gore, no cheap fake jump scares, no music, which music is great and all, I mean music, intense scenes, no anything. It's just a lot of implied violence, just horror. This movie's fucking terrifying, guys. Our imaginations, to me, personally, is what makes this film even more frightening. You get the scene where Kirk stumbles into the house and comes up on the steel door, and there's Leatherface with the sledgehammer and hits him and just keeps hitting him and then drags him behind the door and just slams the door shut. That is chilling. And you don't see what goes on behind the door. Your imagination makes up what's going on behind that door. And that what you can make up in your imagination, to me, is far more terrifying than what they could actually show you. Just this film is terrifying. And our characters, while some people don't like these characters, tend to notice, I do really like these characters. I love Franklin, and I love Sally, and I even like Kirk, Pam, and Jerry as well. They just seem like good people who would never do anything to hurt anyone. So when they're put in danger, you don't want to see anything bad happen to them, and it's just really sad when it does, as well as shocking when the bad stuff happens. Leatherface is played perfectly by Gunnar Hansen. You can tell he doesn't like to kill people, but he does it out of fear, and his family pushes him into that. And he's obviously not able to distinguish, right from wrong because he's obviously mentally unstable. And it's just really sad when he kills Jerry and then he just sits in front of, he looks out the window, tries to see where the hell he's asking himself, you can tell he's asking himself, where the hell are all these people coming from? And then he just sits there with this look of regret on his face. It's beautiful filmmaking. And we don't get films like that anymore. And Jim Seidow is perfect as Drayton. He's a great actor. He's like, to me, Jim Seidow is like the Donald Pleasance of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. Even though Donald Pleasance was like in 5 Halloween films and Jim Seidow was in 2 Texas Chainsaw Massacre films, he just kind of, to me, felt like the Donald Pleasance of the Texas Chainsaw Massacre franchise. He just helped to make this movie even better. And the hitchhiker character was even really well acted. I don't know the actor's name that played the hitchhiker, but very well acted. I've said everything I could say about this film. To me, this is the greatest horror film of all time. I want to thank you guys for watching this video. Please hit that like and subscribe button, and I'm out. Peace.